When we talk about cults, we typically associate them with being either religious or spiritual, targeting those who are seeking guidance in their life and somewhat a greater purpose. From the Manson family cult, who are obsessed with psychedelics and starting some sort of race war, to the People's Temple led by Jim Jones, which led to the horrific Jonestown massacre. But what happens when these cults are neither religious nor spiritual, and they're in fact made up of really talented tech workers from Silicon Valley, who were obsessed with the impending doom of a super intelligent AI? Well, buckle up, because this is the bizarre story of the Zizians.
Alarming and disturbing new details coming to light surrounding the brutal killing of a Vermont Border Patrol agent just last month. Investigators now believe that deadly shooting could be the latest in a spree of other killings around the country linked to a radical death cult known as the Zizians.
How this case is actually tied to a series of murders across the country.
Tonight, the alleged leader of a cult-like group linked to a string of killings from coast to coast in custody.
There are a lot of people involved, and we're still working to figure out the motives of this fringe group, the Zizians.
The Zizians death cult is a bizarre story that is still currently unfolding. It represents what happens when people simply don't touch enough grass and isolate themselves from the rest of society, only consuming the endemic ideology that pushes them into constant fear and indoctrination of utopian ideals. These ideals are often there to solve imaginary problems. But before we get too deep into it, I have to explain what the heck the Zizians are, and how this strange group unfolded into one of the most insane stories of cult indoctrination and murder sprees across America. So, without further ado, let's start from the beginning. Within San Francisco, the Bay Area is home to Silicon Valley, the tech hub of America, known globally across the world. And within Silicon Valley, a movement began to emerge in the late 2000s known as the Rationalist community. A group of people that focused on being able to think more clearly and rationally about certain philosophical topics with the use of mathematical theories and laws of logic. Sounds pretty reasonable and became popular through its main forum called LessWrong. As it grew over the years, the Rationalist community naturally attracts tech workers within the Bay Area, who are not only interested in improving our ability to think more clearly about complex subjects, but to tackle theoretical social issues like poverty or AI safety, and with that came the desire to join a meaningful community. But naturally, human beings don't always get along. And that's when in 2016 a transgender woman and tech worker called Jack LaSota moved from the frosty climate of Alaska to the San Francisco Bay Area. With a degree in computer science and interning at NASA, LaSota wanted to not only get better opportunities within the tech hub of America, but join the rationalist community. So he indulges in the debates and the discussions as he continuously struggles with the woes of startup culture in the Bay Area. But LaSota's view on the world is vastly different from the rest of the rationalists. Even for the mainstream rationalists, his ideals were considered quite extreme. And bearing in mind the rationalist community standards were based upon a lot of fan fiction, including Harry Potter, which they used as the pinnacle of discussions and ideals of ethics and morality. Jack LaSota was a militant vegan who viewed meat eaters as the worst kinds of people to walk the earth. And while there are serious discussions that need to be had about the horrifying nature of factory farming, LaSota's problematic ideals were that he wanted meat eaters to face court trials for their contribution to animal cruelty and the death of animals. This naturally caused friction within the rest of the rationalist community, who obviously probably ate meat. But it also resonated with a small cluster of other rationalists who thought the same, who also happened to be transgender and vegan. One of them being Gwen Danielson, also a transgender tech worker who introduced the bizarre theory of unihemispheric sleep. They described this as being able to have a different gender and have the ability to independently control each hemisphere. And naturally, this concept caused rifts between LaSota and the mainstream rationalists. Shortly after, they began living on a small boat Danielson owned in the Berkeley Marina. This was to avoid the high cost of rent in the Bay Area. And then when Lesotho got some basic sailing skills, he also bought his own boat for about $600 on Craigslist. The two then had the crazy idea to create a seafaring community, a boat-based society called the Rationalist Fleet. So then a few of them went out and bought a Navy tugboat from Alaska that was about 70 years old, sailed it down and began living on it in the Berkeley Marina at the harbour. They called this boat Caleb, not sure why. The boat living group isolated themselves from the rest of society, constantly creating philosophical ideas and concepts, while Jack Lesotho posted various ramblings on his blog under the name Ziz. Eventually the rust-ridden boat became unusable due to succumbing to the sheer amount of rust and structural damage it had incurred in its lifetime, leading it to collide with other boats in the harbour just 4 months into owning it. Naturally, the group abandoned the boat society idea and swapped it for something a little bit easier, well-equipped RVs. In November 2019, Northern California, a strange call goes through to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. There's a call about a threatening disturbance in Westminster Woods, an area where people go as a retreat or to camp out. It's unusual for this to happen, so a few sheriffs go down there to see what's going on. As the sheriffs are radioed in with more information, they find out that this group that were causing a disturbance had black robes and Guy Fawkes masks on. This was a cause for concern for the sheriffs, so they blitzed it down there with the sirens on to see what the hell was going on. There were two groups camping out at that campsite in Westminster Woods. There was a group of children from a school and their teachers, and there was also another group called CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality, which is an offshoot from the rationalist community as well. It turns out that the masked and robed group were trans women: Jack Lesotho, Gwen Danielson, Emma Bohanian and Alex Leatham, all part of the splinter group that lived in RVs after the Rationalist Fleet. SWAT teams had even been called in to handle the situation when there were reports of a gun, and evacuated the children from the camp with armoured vans and vehicles. It turns out that the report of a gun was false, and the group had been there to protest a popular rationalist group, which we already know as CFAR. The sheriffs had no idea what Lesotho and co were protesting about, but they were arrested and charged shortly after. Apparently it's to do with some sort of corruption within the CFAR community, and bearing in mind the rationalist community have cult-like aspects themselves, it's not surprising that there's going to be some friction between different offshoots and splinters. After the four were arrested for their disturbance in Westminster Woods, they were formally exiled by the mainstream rationalist community. They were banned from forums, meetups, and events that were held by the rationalists. Right now, they were completely isolated. And then a website called Zizians.info popped up with the sole purpose of warning other rationalists about this group. And from that moment onwards, they were known as the Zizians. By spring 2021, two Zizians had already unalived themselves. A rationalist who lived with the Zizians on Caleb, called Jay Winterford, committed to unaliving themselves after allegedly Ziz tried to fix/upgrade them. This was the second self-unaliving within the group so far, with a trans woman called Maya Pasek killing herself in 2018 due to attempting to practice the infamous unihemispheric sleep theory. It seems as though Ziz and Danielson had been recruiting vulnerable people and pushing them to the brink of insanity. Despite this happening and a myriad of charges against them, as well as the Zizians.info website that called Ziz a master manipulator and warning others that this was a dangerous death cult, more post-rationalists joined the Zizians and went to live with them on their makeshift commune. This was located on the RV site in Vallejo, which they rented out from a man called Curtis Lind, who had also had a boat on the same Berkeley marina as the Rationalist Fleet. Then something weird happened. Gwen Danielson failed to show up for court one day, and the judge was told on the 19th of August 2022 that she had allegedly committed suicide. she was nowhere to be found. That same day, on August 19th, 2022, the Coast Guard received a distress call from Naomi Lesota. That's Ziz's sister. She had told the Coast Guards that Ziz fell overboard while the three of them, Ziz, Naomi and Emma Borhanian, were out sailing and couldn't find him. The Coast Guard deployed a search team, searching hours on end to never find Ziz's body. The leader of the Zizians was now dead, and an obituary in the Daily News Miner in Fairbanks appeared 2 weeks later, describing Ziz as loving adventure, friends and family, music, blueberries, biking, computer games and animals. Yeah. Naomi obtained a death certificate for Lesota, officially confirming Ziz's death, but things weren't exactly as they seemed. With two of its founding members seemingly dead and gone, a cluster of the remaining Zizians, Suri Dow, Alex Leatham and Emma Borhanian, were still living on RVs on 80-year-old Curtis Lind's property in Vallejo. But Lind had a problem. They had stopped paying rent, and the lease agreement was organised in Gwen Danielson's name, who was no longer around anymore. So Lind took them to court and won to evict them by November 15th, 2022 to get them off the property. However, things took a dark turn just 2 days prior on November 13th, 2022. Suri Dow lures Curtis Lind out to the property, claiming that there was a water leak, and when Lind arrives to take a look at the leak, he is suddenly attacked by multiple figures who begin stabbing him, one even plunging a samurai sword right through his shoulder and out of his stomach. Lind naturally defends himself with a gun, pulling it out and shooting back, hitting two of the Zizians. By the end of the conflict, Lind had been very badly wounded with multiple stab wounds, and a samurai sword had just gone through his entire body, and he had also been stabbed in the eye. Lind was so badly injured in the attack that he lost an eye, while two of these Zizians who were shot, one of them was killed, who was Emma Borhanian, and the other one who was wounded by 2 gunshot wounds was Alex Leatham. And while Curtis Lind was recovering in hospital, the authorities had an idea of why they did the attack. It was so they believed that they wouldn't be evicted if they had killed Curtis Lind, as they wouldn't be able to enact the eviction. All of the Zizians were arrested at the scene who were on the RV site, with one of the members called Julia Dawson appearing to have been someone completely different, and it had turned out to be Jack Ziz Lesota, who had appeared to have faked their own death. A month later, on New Year's Eve, a couple are found shot in their own home in Chester Heights, an upper-class, peaceful neighbourhood in Philadelphia. This was deeply disturbing, as the area had rarely experienced anything as sinister as this. The elderly couple, called Rita and Richard Zajko, were found upstairs in their bedroom. Rita, 69 years old, had a gunshot wound to the back of her head, while her husband Richard, who was 71, had taken a bullet to his right hand and another to his right temple. A 9mm handgun wasn't found at the scene, apart from 2 bullet shells from 9mm bullets. The fact that they were in the comfort of their own home on New Year's Eve and in their bedroom meant that they knew whoever it was that was there and killed them that night. And it's highly likely that they trusted them enough to be in their own bedroom while they were in the house. There was no forced entry, and they were just chilling in their room when they were shot in the head from behind. Now, they had an adopted daughter called Michelle Zajko, who was also transgender, a talented tech worker from Silicon Valley who is now a possible suspect, as her parents were killed on her birthday. This is when things get even weirder. When Pennsylvania state troopers traveled to Zajko's home in Vermont in January 2023, she was staying with someone called Daniel Blank, another talented tech worker in a high-paying corporate job who turned out to have a fascination with the Zizian ideology and philosophy. The troopers asked Zajko questions and took a look at the gun that she had, which turned out to be a 9mm handgun, but without a warrant to seize it, there wasn't much they could do but take a note of what they had found. Right now, Zajko and Blank were on the police's radar and kept a keen eye on. Then about a week later, on the 12th of January, Zajko is arrested at the Candlewood Suites Hotel while allegedly staying there for her parents' funeral. The authorities had obtained a warrant to gather Zajko's DNA, and as she was brought through the hotel lobby, she shouted through to the receptionist to tell Daniel Blank that she had been arrested. Troopers recognized the name, obtained a warrant to search Blank's room, and when they had returned later to breach it, they find him and one other person, which, you guessed it, was Ziz Lasota. Ziz had formerly escaped custody that time when they were arrested by faking a medical condition and escaping hospital, and now he was found in the same hotel with Daniel Blank. Along with finding the 9mm handgun that matched with the one that the officers saw in Vermont, they searched Zajko's green 2013 Subaru and surprisingly discover a large amount of cash to the sum of $40,000. Without any charges against both Zajko and Blank, they were released but never came back for the $40,000. They were now in the wind. It's so bizarre. It's just strange. Why wouldn't you come back for $40,000 unless there was something you had done? As for Ziz, he was in jail with bail set to $500,000. These actions, along with the cult-like behaviour, strongly indicated that they were involved with the murder of Zajko's parents on New Year's Eve. On the 24th of February 2023, a community alert goes up on the LessWrong website, the forum that the Rationalist community originally emerged from. The community alert explains that Ziz faked his own death and that Gwen Danielson likely had done the same. The blog also expands on the conflict between the Zizians and their former landlord Curtis Lind, and that they are a dangerously violent group with the determination to exert their ideology onto others. The community alert received a lot of horrified comments from mainstream rationalists who couldn't believe what they had just read about this rationalist offshoot, who were absolutely batshit crazy. A group of about 30 people were developed to what we know as the Zizians, and they became so dedicated to this cult that they would commit violent crimes without any remorse. Their methods were more about creating new ways of thinking. The Zizians were about enforcing their beliefs on the rest of society, no matter the outcome. To the Zizians, it was all just a means to the end. Whatever their actions were, the ends justified it. The ends justified the means to them. Regardless of who was harmed in the process, they used confusing ideologies from everything like Star Wars to influence their belief system, mixed in with transgender ideology and militant veganism, as well as the impending doom of AI. Ziz's bail was reduced from the $500,000 to $50,000 in 2023, and was surprisingly AWOL after being bailed out by his mum, who promised the judge that Ziz would attend court. With Ziz missing and Blank and Zajko also in the wind, a couple of years go past without any commotion from the Zizians. At this point, Gwen Danielson has also allegedly faked her own death, which her father had confirmed that she was alive and well and working under a different name in the construction industry. But as things were seen to have died down, the Zizians reared their ugly heads again in January 2025. Two people, Felix Bockholt and Teresa Youngblood, check into a hotel in Lyndonville, Vermont. As they go up to their rooms, a hotel worker reports them to the authorities with a few concerns. The two were wearing all black tactical clothing and open carrying guns. And despite open carry being legal in Vermont, this is quite a worrying sight. Then 3 days later, on the 17th of January, authorities find 82-year-old Curtis Lind murdered in one of the worst ways that you can imagine. A man wearing a mask and a purple shirt snuck up behind Lind, put an arm around his neck, and began to ruthlessly stab him in the chest. The man who has been charged for this brutal murder is Maximilian Snyder, a 22-year-old from Seattle with a computer science and philosophy degree from Oxford. They find him with connections to the Zizian Cult, and prosecutors allege he was trying to prevent Lind from testifying against his attackers from the samurai sword attack, Alex Leatham and Suri Dao, who are currently in custody waiting for court. The two of these Zizians were due to face trial for these crimes in 2 days' time. And with Lind being the only eyewitness to this attack, the Zizians saw this as their only way of escaping justice. Lind was now the third murder linked to the Zizians. Authorities and reporters then find out that Snyder had applied for a marriage license in November 2024 with Teresa Youngblood, one of the people wearing the all-black tactical clothing in the hotel in Lindenville. And it turns out that Bockholt was a big shot quant trader with links to the same Jane Street capital where Sam Bankman-Fried worked. This is all so strange. No one can really put this into words of how strange this is. All of these connections coming back to the Zizians, law enforcement are on Youngblood and Bockholt's tail. A few days later, law enforcement agents spot both Youngblood and Bockholt leaving a Walmart and begin tailing them. The pair head down Interstate 91, known for being a major highway running from Connecticut to the Canadian border. 3 border patrol vehicles are tailing the two Zizians. They put on their flashing lights and pull them over. As the two Zizians are pulled over, Youngblood instantly steps out the vehicle, and before you know it, pulled out a gun and began firing at the agents with a Glock handgun. An intense firefight breaks out, and the ensuing chaos resulted in Bockholt being killed and Youngblood is shot and wounded themselves. But one of the border patrol agents, David Mayland, is unfortunately killed in this shootout. Nobody truly knows what the pair of Zizians were doing on the highway on the way to the border, but it likely wouldn't have been good, and this entire altercation was so sudden that nobody could prepare for it. But it seems that the Zizians were ready for violence. As Snyder is charged with Lind's murder, the police find out that the 2 guns that were used in the shootout were bought by one of the other Zizians, Michelle Zajko, who was a person of interest in her parents' murder. All of this chaotic and senseless violence stemmed from this one group of people in multiple different states, and nobody understands why. They just left a trail of destruction in their wake. So in February 2025, Lesota, Zajko and Blank were found and arrested in Frostburg, Maryland. With authorities categorically pissed by this point with the tragedies that the Zizians had caused, Lesota is being held without bail, but the charges are fairly lenient as the evidence against them seems to be lacking to try them in court for crimes like conspiracy and murder. Somehow, after all of this madness, these cultists have mostly got away with what they have committed, and Ziz doesn't seem to be facing his responsibility for being the leader of this bizarre cult. I'm not really sure what to make of all of this. We don't actually know much about Ziz other than he was a tech worker from Alaska, moving down to find a sense of purpose with other rationalists, but a cult leader has a prominent presence within the group. This is simply what happens when people do not socialize enough with other groups of people, and they shelter themselves inside a single echo chamber. They're just bouncing ideas around with each other, and they believe their own nonsense. And when they start believing in sci-fi fan fiction and use it to justify real consequences in the physical world, in the material world, you have this happen. Complete and utter chaos that no one can make sense of.